Hey everybody, it's Mr. George, and today I want to do a video on ancient and classical Greece. So let's get started. So when we think of Greece, which is obviously a country today, it's really a country that has developed civilizations based on its geography. So we start to see um, based on the mountainous area, difficult terrain to travel, we start to see that it really becomes a civilization surrounded by water. And that's where we start to see where they get their food from, where they start to create their communities within these um, different areas that are separated geographically. And we also see them traveling through water to get to other places where ultimately they'll end up, interacting, trading, and fighting. So regarding ancient Greece, we're talking three different areas. I'm sorry, three different peoples. We don't have like a lot of information as far as like recorded history. A lot of this is kind of put together, based on like artifacts. So regarding, we have the Minoans, we have the Mycenaeans, and we have the Dorians. Okay, so um, once we kind of like move past the Dorians, we're going to start to get into like this classical period in Greece. So this is kind of referred to as like ancient Greece time period, and I'm going to show you a timeline with classical Greece in a few minutes. And when we say classical Greece, we're really talking about Western civilization. So here's some information regarding the Minoans, regarding named after King Minos, and that's the monster in the labyrinth. Maybe you heard the story with the half human, half bull. And a lot of this information really is based on items that have been excavated. Okay. One thing that's unique about this civilization is we tend to see that women were held in like high regard. Okay. Uh, which, as we start to talk about Greek gods and goddesses, we do have men and women, male and female gods. And then we really do have some type of we're not exactly sure how it ended, whether it was a natural disaster, um, you know, what actually happened that kind of like put it to a halt. Okay, the Mycenaeans in southern Greece. Um, and then as far as they start to interact, they have contact, whether it's to trade or whether they're fighting. We're going to talk about Homer in a minute. Most have heard of the Trojan War, uh, where we get the saying, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. So again, we'll talk about Homer in a minute. And then this last group, before we get to the classical civilization, um, the Dorians. So again, not a lot of written records in this time period. A lot of this has kind of been pieced together, you know, through historical artifacts or inferences. So regarding Homer, as a storyteller, we don't know a lot about this person. But one thing that's important with this civilization, as with a lot of civilizations, is that we are seeing some type of story that is providing a way of life, a way of culture, what the Greeks valued, how they lived, and also provides some type of like pride in the individuals or the heroes that we see within these stories. And we see this with like lots of different cultures, whether it's the Ramayana in India, whether it's the Epic of Gilgamesh in uh, in Mesopotamia, whether it's the story of the legend of the Buddha in India, whether it's the story of Romulus and Remus in Rome. So all these cultures tend to have these stories that whether they're told and they're being passed down orally, or whether they're actually being like documented through something that's been able to be kind of like either translated or preserved. Because I know many of my students still read the Odyssey, the story of Odysseus, in schools today, and a lot of them do follow like this epic hero cycle, this hero's journey that takes them from this call to action, and brings them through these different phases, these different steps where they have these challenges, internal and external challenges. They tend to have some type of like powers. They hit rock bottom, and then they start to work towards their way back. Tends to be like a lesson, some type of like atonement takes place. So a lot of these stories can tend to follow this type of model. And we see that today when we look at superheroes such as Batman or Superman. So as we get into classical Greece, we will in class start to look at different forms of government in city-states. Why we do this is it's important because we're getting the certain pieces of Greek culture have influenced the United States. So as we move into this period, we're going to just kind of go through this pretty quickly. The Persian Wars, which were between the Greeks and Persia. So at this point, the Greeks have different city-states that kind of band together. Okay, so they're city-states, which means they're independent. They're governed the way that they want to govern, and they can kind of come together when they need to, whether it's as far as trade or whether it's as far as banding together to fight off some type of common enemy, which is always one reason for different peoples to unite. So brings up our first person within the Persian Wars, which is King Darius. And I'm just going to kind of go through this pretty quickly. We have different battles of significance. We have this Battle of Marathon, which is where we get this character, this individual Phidippides, that runs, the 26 miles and then dies, which is where we get the name Marathon as they start to work towards these types of sporting events, which turn into the Olympics. The Battle of Thermopylae, which is where we see the Spartans, a much smaller Spartan group, ends up fighting the Persians, where they're all killed, which was made into a movie, 300. And Battle of Salamis. So again, through all these different battles here in Persia, we have Battle of Plataea. So as we kind of, what ends up happening is the Greeks kind of like fend off the Persians, and as a result, we see Greek independence. It also prevents Persia from conquering the rest of Europe. We have these different city-states that kind of band together into different groups. One's the Delian League, that will be headed by Athens, and then the Peloponnesian League is brought in through Sparta. One of the impacts of the Persian Wars is ultimately it leads to this golden age of Athens, or this age of Pericles, as Pericles was the character or was the leader during this time period. And Herodotus is an individual in this time period that we kind of look at as a historian at this time who's recording these. And this just kind of gives us a map here that kind of allows us to see where places are regarding these different battles within the Persian Wars. So as we kind of move into this period, 621, we start to see things are changing in Athens. They're also changing in different city-states here, where we have this individual Draco. And even today, when we have people have these ideas where harsh punishments for like any crime, you'll hear people say, "Oh, that's very draconian." Okay? So what's essentially going to start happening is you're going to see a broader sense of democracy where it's not equality for everyone, but we're starting to see a greater sense of individuals that are having a say in what is taking place. So this broader sense of democracy, which is very similar to the United States, where it first started with wealthy white landowning men, and then we start to see it expand, and even to today, where we've expanded. So this is kind of like what's happening in Athens. Solon, 594 BC, another Athenian leader. One thing that's important for him is he outlawed debt slavery. Cleisthenes, 500, again, breaking up more power of just a small group, and again, expanding or broadening democracy. And we're also seeing these ideas behind citizenship. And then as we get to the golden age of Athens, we have Pericles, okay, who was wanted to strengthen democracy by spending money and glorifying Athens and making Athenians feel very proud to be Athenian. So we have this strengthening of democracy, and within democracy in Athens, we're really talking about a direct democracy, which is really majority rules. But it isn't that everyone has a say. Okay, direct democracy really means everyone votes, majority wins, versus what we have in the United States, which is a republic, which is a representative democracy. We vote for people. Those people then will vote on our behalf. So that's a difference between a direct democracy and a republic. But essentially, we've taken elements of direct democracy in lots of things. When we vote for people who are running for U.S. Senate in a certain state, it's majority wins. Okay, if you're voting for someone for a school committee or your local school board, it's a direct democracy. Count the votes, the majority wins. So again, we've taken these elements here, and this has really turned Athens into an empire that really becomes kind of a threat to other city-states. Specifically, we're getting in the direction of Sparta. So, and we're also getting this is where we kind of tie in with the Greek philosophers, where we talked about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle in a prior video. So we start to get this tension between these two strong individual city-states. Sparta is an oligarchy ruled by a wealthy few, and we have Athens is a direct democracy. It becomes a feud. And then we have the war between the two of them is referred to as the Peloponnesian War. Now, essentially, the results of this is that Athens lose. Even though Athens has a strong navy, Sparta has a strong army, which makes sense because Sparta is inland and Athens is on the water. So the effects of this is that we have a couple things. Some Athenians, specifically Socrates, is kind of questioning the government, and we start to see different people now discussing things, talking about things. And this was very representative of Greece anyways, was having a dialogue, having people discuss things. And now we start to have different belief systems, people challenging different things. So again, there's a lot going on in this video. It gives us this migration from ancient Greece to, and this timeline brings us into this establishment of this polis or this political unit. This shows us where the Iliad and the Odyssey, Draco, Solon. Now at this point, 500 BC is around the same time that Rome is beginning as a republic. So we have an oligarchy in Sparta, democracy. This brings us the Persian Wars to our golden age of Athens. So this is really classical Western civilization, Peloponnesian Wars, and this is going to kind of bring us into our next unit, which will be on Alexander the Great.